Hey everyone, thanks for joining me for this video. I apologize it's not as well produced as the last one, but this is just kind of a podcasty type deal I want to do probably once a week to talk about current events and interpret them through the lens of socialism and, kind of speculate what it means for the socialist revolution, if you will, and for the future of capitalism across the world and in the United States. And most of the current events that I'm going to cover are going to be in the United States because that's where I live and that's where I have the most experience in. But it's not going to be exclusively in the United States. It's going to be primarily the United States. So with that out of the way, today I want to talk about Donald Trump, who is now the Republican president of the United States. Sorry, it's still hard for me to utter those words. Not that Hillary Clinton would have been any better, but I was definitely not expecting Donald Trump to take victory this election cycle. So now that the shock and awe has passed and Donald Trump has had some time to talk about his plans and what he's going to do, I particularly want to focus on the economy. I don't think we need to talk about social issues under Donald Trump. I'm pretty sure everybody is well aware what Donald Trump means for social issues. We've seen the rise of the alt-right. We've seen how he handles immigration. We've seen how he handles race relations. It's not going to be pretty. Spoiler alert, neither is the economy. So what do we have here with a President Trump? What we have here is the face of what you could argue is a new Republican Party, in which the Republican Party has always been pro-employer, pro-business, pro-free market, pro-opportunity, and you have a guy who is now the president in the face of this party who is turning his back on that, who's, intervening with the markets, intervening with private corporate decisions, telling companies, like Carrier and Ford what to do, threatening companies if they move their factories overseas and endanger American workers' jobs. And one thing I'm going to get out of the way here right now, it's going to seem from a limited perspective here for at least a short while that I'm going to be pro-Trump, that I'm going to try and advocate Trump as a champion of the working class. I'm going to dispel that right away. He is not. He's going to be an absolute disaster for the working class, but first we need to get through some of these basic concepts, and I'll get to there in a minute. So this is what Donald Trump is trying to do. He's trying to interfere with private companies and trying to tell them what to do and threatening them with consequences if they do things he doesn't like. And, he's trying to trump himself up, no pun intended, as the working people's champion. And, this is how he's going to do it. He's going to prevent corporations from going to Mexico. That's what he said specifically. I'm not sure how he's going to prevent them from going to other countries. But then he's also going to prevent China from importing goods so cheaply. So he's going to enforce a tariff on them, details of which I'll get to in a second. But first, let's talk about the jobs moving to Mexico. He wants to encourage American employers to stay in the United States, keep their factories here, by, of all things, lowering the corporate tax rate. Right now, the corporate tax rate is 35%. Never mind the fact that most corporations and their, rich CEOs don't even pay income tax in the first place, Donald Trump being included amongst them. The immediate consequence that you have to ask yourself of that is, how the hell is he going to pay for such a tax decrease, especially when so many aren't paying it already? And that's a lot of money. Corporations pay a lot of money in that 35% tax, the ones that do. And you're going to have to recomp that somehow. And the only ways you can really do that, the only ways you can make up for lowering a tax by that much, it's 35%. He wants to lower it down to 15%. Republicans in Congress want to lower it to 20%. They want that compromise. You're talking about such a huge loss of money. You're going to have to either raise taxes on the working class to make up for that, or you're going to have to cut government spending, which is going to have its own negative impacts on the economy as a whole. You have to ask yourself, sure, you can give these companies these tax breaks, you can give them an easy ride, and then that'll encourage them to stay in the country. I argue that it won't, but I'll get there in a minute. But, what are they going to use the money that they're saving? They've already got so much money. 1% of the population controls over, 40% of the wealth? That's insane. What are they going to do with this money that they're saving and not giving to the government? Well, bourgeois people tend to do one of two things with excess money that they have. They either lobby the government for it, so it's just going to go back to the government anyway, or they invest it, sometimes with the government in the form of stocks, bonds, whatever. If they don't invest it through the government, then they invest it through other private enterprises. But, the scenario you have to paint your picture here is pretty absurd. So you're going to give these capitalists, the bourgeoisie, you're going to give them these huge tax cuts, and the only thing they can really do with that money is provide more luxury to themselves and funnel it back into the government, usually with interest involved. So that's going to be disastrous for the future of our deficit as well. So, you've got this double whammy effect on the national deficit, which so many people are already concerned about. I would say wrongfully so, but either way, that's something you're going to have to deal with as President Trump, who wants to lower the corporate tax rate in such a fashion. And then that's not even guaranteed to work, because many of the countries these companies move their factories to have a corporate tax rate of 0. They don't pay corporate taxes in those countries. So you're still going to see American jobs move over there. So let's say Donald Trump succeeds. He lowers the corporate tax rate, and then he manages to put in some laws where you're not allowed to leave the country. You're not allowed to put your factories in China and India and Bermuda or wherever it is that you're putting your factories for lower labor and lower tax rates. Let's say that he manages to do this. Well, capitalists are not going to pay American workers American wages. It's just not going to happen. So you got 3 options available to you. You can pay Americans what they're not worth. You could try to get around paying the minimum wage. Or since you can't move to the other countries like Mexico, you can bring the Mexicans over yourself and then, basically pay them what you would pay any other illegal immigrant, which is an incredibly low wage with no benefits. And they're not going to go anywhere to try and fight for themselves because it's incredibly risky for them too. I mean, you're talking about a dude who once said he wants to immediately round up about 3 million people and kick them out of the country. So there's no way illegal immigrants are going to go to the government for help if they're, being exploited under these capitalists. Or the third option is you're going to see automation speed up, which automation is coming for our jobs anyway in America. It doesn't matter who's president. It doesn't matter what the capitalists or socialists do. Automation is coming. It's just the policies between now and then are going to affect how fast we see automation happen. So either way, you're going to get this massive unemployment in the United States because the capitalists will do whatever they can to make sure that wages are low, production costs are low, and profit margins are high. And this is where we kind of get into this self-defeating bit of capitalism. I don't want to spend too much time on it because I'll make my own video about this entire subject later on in the future. But while we're here, you've got this sort of paradoxical type event where capitalists do whatever they can to lower the production costs so that their profit margins can be higher. And then what they inadvertently do by doing that, cutting wages, moving factories, cutting positions, everything you need to do to cut labor costs, you end up with a massive unemployment population, and you wind up with, those who aren't unemployed are making minuscule wages at best. So you see the overall purchasing power of the population go down. So now the people can't buy what you're producing. So that's the only thing you've effectively done as a capitalist, is dug your own grave because you put so much effort into cutting production cost that you're not paying wages to the people who would buy your stuff, so they're not buying your stuff. I mean, this isn't rocket science. This is pretty basic stuff. And that's just if Donald Trump succeeds in preventing corporate exodus. Let's move down to China. So China, right, imports much of the cheap labor goods that Americans depend on for their quality of life into the United States. Donald Trump wants to prevent that. He wants more American-made stuff to be bought. And he wants to incentivize people to buy American-made stuff over Chinese-made stuff. So he's going to impose a tariff of, I think it was 35, maybe 45% on all goods imported from China to the United States. This has its own set of consequences. The first and very obvious one is that you're going to severely raise the prices of these cheap goods that come in from China with this tariff. So now your lower class Americans, whether they're middle lower class or they're lower class period, suddenly they've lost the affordability on the cheap goods that give them such a good quality of life. The middle class, too, depends greatly on Chinese goods. They're going to have to fork up more money to be able to afford a good standard of living. And what you've done is you've lowered the average quality of life for every American citizen in doing this. Couple that with the fact that you've just completely stagnated American wage growth, the ability for Americans to purchase goods and services in the country, and you have a completely stagnated domestic economy. Your people aren't going to be able to buy anything. Their quality of life is going to continue to go down. Their wage condition is not going to be able to improve whatsoever. And you're just going to have all of these companies producing the stuff that won't sell. So what are they going to do? They're going to try and sell it overseas. But do you honestly think that China isn't selling to the rest of the world as well, and the other countries that produce cheap goods? So even though the capitalists in this country, who are now forced to only produce in this country, have severely lowered their production costs, I guarantee you it's still not going to be anywhere near the low production costs that are in countries like China, India, and Brazil. So you're going to have to compete with China, and you're not going to be able to do that and make a profit. Their profit margins are going to be higher than yours. They'll always be able to beat their prices. It's just not going to end well. So you're going to have a completely ruined capitalist economy from the United States. And this is just an exemplifier of the internal contradictions that exist within capitalism. Some people like to claim Donald Trump is a fascist, and I would say that that's a bit of a stretch, but he may definitely become one should this economic scenario become a reality. I believe someone once said, I can't remember off the top of my head without my notes in front of me, but fascism is simply capitalism in decline. And this is certainly what we're looking at in this modern day capitalist society. Donald Trump is certainly a symptom of a capitalist society in decline. And what will happen in the United States as a result will echo throughout the rest of the world. It is my belief that we're seeing the final days of capitalism, that we're seeing its final attempt to clutch on for dear life until people come after the capitalists with the pitchforks, in my opinion. But honestly, I don't think Donald Trump is going to get any of that done. I think he's a populist vote. He's not. The Republican Party is not going to let him get away with doing what he wants to do, because the interests that Donald Trump seems to be portraying, the interests of the Republican Party, they're directly against each other. And the Republican Party is not going to allow Donald Trump to go unchecked. He's merely their puppet, in my opinion. That's all I got for you guys tonight. Let me know what you think below. Contribute to the conversation, and I'll be back with a more well-produced video, hopefully within the next week here. Catch you guys later, and don't forget to agitate, educate, and organize.